Good afternoon, guests. It's really an honor to have you spend your Saturday afternoon with us, but it is such an honor to have one of our trustees, Ross Grossman, who has a vast amount of experience in human resources and in the area of planning your legacy. And to have him speak is just terrific. What we're going to do is have Ross speak, and then questions will be taken. Chris Sedlock is sitting here with me, our Vice President of Development, and he will read the question, and hopefully it will be answered to your satisfaction. So without further ado, I'm so privileged and happy to present our trustee, Ross Grossman.
Thank you, Joanne. Thanks everybody for taking a Saturday afternoon on this particular subject. I may or may not be an expert in human resources. I am not an expert in planning your legacy, but I want to share with you the journey that I and my family went through figuring this out. I suspect some of these things are going to sound familiar to many of you. What I would like to do is, as I said, share essentially our journey in getting to the point where we have a plan. It is there aren't a lot of places to go to get this kind of education. I will tell you, it takes many years to achieve clarity on some of the things that I've talked about. So it's not for nothing that most people become legacy givers in their 60s and 70s. The other insight that I had along the way is you have to learn, many of us, given our backgrounds, have to learn to be a giver before you can do some of these more sophisticated things. So what I'd like to do is share my background, which may be very much like some of your backgrounds. I want to share my evolution and my family's evolution as givers. I want to share the key questions that we had to confront as we were beginning to clarify things on this journey. And they're very much, I think, the questions that many of you are either wrestling with now or will have to wrestle with at some point, I hope. And then I want to talk a bit about when we got to the point where we had some clarity, how we thought through our priorities and how we thought through what we hope to be our legacy and the mark that we want to leave after we're gone. And then I'm at a very, very high level going to share with you how it ended up, at least at this point for us. And I'm not going to share our detailed financial and estate plans, but I'll share with you sort of how the journey is ending as of now. So my background, nothing in my life, nothing in my early life, nothing in my family history prepared me and prepared us for the things that we had to confront along the way of becoming a donor, becoming a giver, setting our legacy. I'm a second generation American. My parents came over from Eastern Europe. I'm a first generation university attendee. Most of my family, and it's a large family from my generation, did not go to college. Probably a third of us, maybe less than that, went to college. We were lower middle class at best through most of my upbringing. We had no exposure to philanthropy in childhood or even young adulthood. We received no inheritance. I don't know of anybody in my family who received an inheritance of any significant amount. And there really were no role models in my life until I got pretty far along in my life. So we came to this absolutely cold. Okay. Now, I don't know the extent to which that resonates with the audience, but there's got to be a subset of you. I literally had no clue early in life and had to learn a whole bunch of things along the way to be able to do the things that we're doing. And I also had to get really lucky. So me now, I just turned 75 years old. My wife is the same age and background. We have two adopted children. One is 42 and one is 39. So they're well in their lives. Our oldest has special needs. Will never be self-supporting. So that's another wrinkle in our planning over the years. We have two wonderful grandsons, age 3 and 5. And thus far we're in good health. So we haven't had, the big worries about health, and we have good health care. Now, my financial evolution, again, this is probably pretty typical with some happy endings in it. So I was in higher ed as a student or as a teacher until my late 20s when I made a career change. We were starving students for a while, and were what we thought was comfortable in our late 20s, but certainly we were again middle class at best. When I started working in corporations, we had a solid, very comfortable income from our late 20s. We were not, by our definition, wealthy, but we had a good growing income up until I got into my 50s, at which, because I worked for a biotechnology company that hit the jackpot. We, from that point on, had in our frame of mind, we were rich beyond our wildest dreams, although we are not billionaires. We're not close to being billionaires. But we are quite comfortable by any expectations that we had, but that wasn't until relatively late in life. We've always lived a comfortable but not an extravagant lifestyle. And we had savings for a comfortable retirement. By the time we were in our early 50s, we had what we thought would be enough to be comfortable in retirement, not wealthy, not lavish, but comfortable, and then, from that point on, it became more than we thought we needed. Okay, and now my philanthropic evolution, and this may or may not resonate, but again, we had no exposure to charitable giving at all from our families. They may or may not have made small donations, but we were unaware. They certainly didn't make big donations. I went to work for large corporations in my late 20s and stayed in large corporations until my early 50s. And in those companies, at least this is now the late 70s, early 80s, 90s, there was a tradition in large companies in those years of encouraging employees to make charitable donations. So you had the United Way drives, you had savings bond drives, you had blood drives, which was a different way of giving. but there was a culturation around one of your obligations is to give. And we made what, looking back, were small regular donations to charities that seemed like a lot to us at the time. And we kind of got in the groove that we had an obligation to do things on the outside. As I advanced in my career, another thing that the corporations encouraged was service on nonprofit boards. So I began to go on small nonprofit boards. And part of the expectation of being on a nonprofit board is that as a board member, you'll make some kind of donation. And we began to give what again seemed to us to be huge donations to these organizations. They were actually quite small relative to our income and relative to where we ended up. But it was a learning experience. You had to learn to write that check, and I can remember my wife questioning, do we really need to give that much? We just had no background in doing these things. And then as I advanced in my career, the boards got larger, the checks got larger, but they were still quite modest in the great scheme of things. But it was something that we essentially learned to do. We learned that there was value. We learned that you could target your donations to things that are meaningful to to things that were meaningful to us. We could begin to see the positive impact of giving. And that was essentially how we got to the middle of it all. The big breakthrough is probably not the right word. The big tipping point was, and again, this came with age and luck. The big tipping point was when we finally figured out, okay, we are going to have enough money for us to retire comfortably, and there's going to be something left over for our family. And then at some point it was, and we'll talk some more about that, it was, there may be more than we want to give to our family. What do we do about that? Okay. And as part of that evolution, because we now had some years behind us, we had some experience behind us, we had a perspective, we were more mature in most ways. Along the way, we were refining the whole notion of what's important to us. What are the causes that are meaningful? And I'll share a little bit more about that along the way. And that's a very personal decision. And it's really going to be you and your values and your family values that will determine that if you get there. So these are, when I look back at it, these are the questions that really dominated all those years. In the early years, when you're really not sure of a number of things, I've got 20 more years to work, or I've got 10 more years to work, and I'm probably going to have 25 or 30 years of retirement. And what do I need, just to be able to live in retirement and do the things I want to do? How much money do I need to save? How much money do I need to have to do that? And then these are all scenarios you need to think about at the same time. And then how much money do I need to have a really comfortable retirement where I don't ever have to worry. And then at some point, if you're lucky, it's how much do I have to have in retirement that I simply don't need anymore to live the way that I want to live. And I certainly hope that you get to have that that analysis. And the big question is, how much money do I need to save? And that's affected by your choices. It's affected by inflation. It's not an easy analysis, and it changes year to year. There are lots of tools to help you with those kinds of analyses. And there are people, and we'll talk some more about that too. There are people who can help you with those analyses. But right now you could go in and do this calculation online fairly easily, and you should be doing it, and you should be doing it regularly and updating it. The piece that I didn't anticipate, because I couldn't have envisioned it, though, and it was and is the most difficult thing that we're continuing to wrestle with, is, if you get to the point where you're covered on your retirement, you're not going to have to go live with your children if you don't want to. You're not going to have to be supported by anybody else. You're not going to have to work any more than you want to work in retirement, and you still have excess funds in there. The most daunting question, for us at least, is how much is too much to leave to our children and grandchildren. Okay. And I can tell you, nothing prepared us for this. And it's the hardest, most wrenching issue that we're dealing with, because, there's a natural desire to want to take care of your children and your grandchildren or your family or whatever it is. And to have them not want, and have them not worry, and have them not do things. But probably the biggest mistake I made, although it wasn't a mistake, about 15 years ago, I watched a documentary, probably on Netflix, about the children of truly wealthy people in the Northeast, and it's probably still available. And it was the heirs of the Johnson and Johnsons, and the heirs of the Mars family, of Mars Candy, and the heirs of the Trump family, and the heirs of the Kennedy family. And it was names that are familiar to you now in some of those cases, when they were in their early and mid 20s. And there were a whole lot of really screwed up young people who had gotten too much too soon. And while we're not near being in that camp, we worry a lot about our grandchildren. We're not worried about our children anymore, because they're formed, and that worked out just fine. But I worry about our grandchildren not being challenged, not knowing how to make sacrifices, not going through some of the experiences that we went through that helped us be better people. And we're continuing to wrestle with that issue. So it's a nice, one of my bosses always used to say, these are high-end problems, and they are high-end problems, but it's a really wrenching process that, again, is all about your values, and you'll have to go through that, I hope. When you get through that part, then the question is, can we leave a legacy? And if so, what do we want it to be? So I'm going to stop depressing you about your grandchildren, and I'll take you through that a bit. Before I do, though, I'm not going to give financial advice. I'm not the right person. We were lucky to have good financial advice most of the way. And I hope you do that. But I guess what I would say to you is if you can get good advisors, it's better than not. With us, we were lucky that we had people who knew what they were doing, who knew who good people were. So I wouldn't just dial up somebody. If they're not asking you about your risk tolerance as the first thing, as the first question, I would run the other way. If they're not talking to you about diversification, I would run the other way. If they want you to invest a lot of money in a very few things, I would run the other way. But there probably are ways to do this totally online. I'm not a person who can advise that, but there certainly are tools online. Based on our experience, as you go through this evolution, and it's not right away, you can probably do much of this on your own early in life. But when you get to estate planning, you need some experts to do that. You need good attorneys, you need good advisors, and it would be very helpful to find those people by asking other people who they use. And as I said before, the most difficult questions involve introspection and looking at your personal values. And it can be much more grueling than I ever would have guessed. Okay. All right. So how did we end up ranking our priorities? So our first priority, as I said, was meeting our own retirement needs. You can't take care of your family, in my view. You make your own decision if you can't take care of yourself, and so you need to make sure that you can do that. So we spent a lot of time earlier in our life looking at those questions about how much do we need to save? Do we have it? What do we need to do to make sure we do? Our next priority, and this is our priorities, not your priorities. Our next priority was our children and grandchildren, and making sure that they were comfortable without messing them up. And then over the years, our priorities evolved as we got more involved in different things. And initially, because we had a special needs child, a lot of what we did was around children and special needs children. And we do a little bit in that arena still. But over the years, I became convinced. Some of it was looking at myself and my own family. Some of it was becoming involved with universities, becoming involved with CEE, becoming involved in some other organizations. I decided the biggest impact that we could have was encouraging first generation students to go to college. That's the way you change not just the trajectory of a person's life, but you end up changing the trajectory of their children and their children's lives by doing that. And that is far and away our top priority. Now, when I look at the differences between myself and my older brother who went to college and my two younger brothers who didn't, and the difference in the worlds that our children live in and the opportunities that our children have and that their children are going to have. That's where I talk about impact. And I probably have 35 cousins. And when I look at my cousins who went to college versus those who didn't, and the lives of their children and the worlds, how narrow or wide the worlds are of the children, the next generation, that's our top priority. Okay. And then there are specific, and we hope to have enough left over when we die that we'll be able to make significant gifts, however you define that. We've defined it to that cause, and that's going to be our major legacy. We also hope to be able to give relatively large gifts, meaningful gifts, to specific organizations that aren't in that world, but that we've been involved in, that we think add value, that we care about. And they tend to be in communities that we've lived in. And the religious institution where we spent the most time. And then to the extent that there's money left over, we have lots of nieces and nephews and a few others who we don't want to leave large amounts to, but that we want to leave something to. And that's how we ended up allocating our estate. We've taken care of ourselves. We're going to take care of our children, and we think we're going to have enough for these causes. Okay. And it took time, it took analysis. I'm going to share a little bit time, and it took some analysis, and it took some soul searching to get here, but this is where we are now. So just a little bit on how we plan for all of this. So at a certain point, it became clear that we were going to have enough money left over to do something for those groups beyond our family, beyond our children. But we weren't certain how much. And so what we did was, and there's a mock spreadsheet on the left of this slide, my left of this slide. And on my spreadsheet, obviously, I have the specific organizations. I have specific percentages. And then I have what I believe, and on my slide sheet, I've got, I think, 5 different scenarios of potential amounts left over that we think we will be able to donate towards this legacy. And the numbers are bigger than $100 and $200 and $300, and your numbers will be whatever they are. But essentially, there's an amount that if we have X dollars, this much is going to go to this university and that university and to CEE and to whatever the others are. Okay. And I update that periodically, but I have enough scenarios that I think we've covered all the bases. Okay. So you can do this kind of this is just a simple Excel spreadsheet that I did for myself, but it helped me clarify. And it also gave me something that I could give to the attorney who does our wills that we can eventually get documented. Excuse me. And it's a living document. I still don't know what those numbers are going to be. Okay. And then from this, we developed specific plans. So we have 2 significant gifts to universities that are documented and signed and agreed to. And I can back out of those, but at least the university knows, and I know, and eventually we'll, they're set up at this point to be paid out on the second death. So between my wife and me, after we're both gone, then we would pay those things out to these charities. But our plan is periodically to review and see if we're in a position to do it earlier. Because we'd like to see the impact before we die, but we're just not certain yet that makes sense. But that's part of our thinking. Beyond those 2 significant, we have 2 other large You know, and you can define significant and large if you want. I know what that means to me. We have 2 large gifts to organizations we care about that are documented and signed, and those organizations know what they will be. Same structure, pay out when we die, but we hope we can do it sooner. And then our attorney has a detailed list of particular individuals and small gifts to particular organizations that will be paid out when our will is executed. Okay, so essentially we moved over the years from not having a clue about anything to developing our understanding of what it means to be a giver, the value of giving, because that's part of the learning. It feels good. The tools that are available to us as givers, to scenarios, to actual plans. Okay, and again, it took a long time, but you can get somewhere on this journey. You should be somewhere on this journey. Right now we have these are the final products, and the reason I have final in quotes is because it ain't final till it's almost final. So we're continuing to review, we're continuing to think, but basically this is going to be it. So we have detailed wills, which you're going to have to do if you have enough money for all of this. Somewhere along the line, they're going to advise you to start setting up different kinds of trusts, and that's mainly estate planning 101, to make certain as much as possible goes to the people you want to give it to. You'll pay enough taxes, period, but that you're not paying more than you need to. We have a couple specific trusts for individuals. Our daughter has a special needs trust because she has special needs, and there are such things. And we're beginning to set up trusts for our grandchildren, although we're truly wrestling with how do you pay those things out in a way that they're not buying a Maserati at 18. We have documented letters of agreement for the larger gifts. And as I said, we have a list of small bequests. So we, you know, at it took to about age 72 or 3 for us to get this all nailed down. But we're pretty close to nail down on that. You know, I started out working in financial institutions, and every financial institution has an arm that they hope their employees will use for their own individual financial planning. So I worked initially for a big insurance company, and I had a financial advisor who was an insurance guy. In the great scheme of things, I'm not sure I would do that again. It didn't hurt me any, but the focus is too narrow, I think. At one point, I worked for a big global financial institution, and I used a sort of dedicated financial advisor from one of those firms. And these were professionals. Those were good people. They were a little too tied to their own products as I look back now. So that was a lesson learned. I was lucky, excuse me, because I went to work for a great CEO who started a company. He was convinced that we were all going to be wealthy beyond our wildest dreams, well before we all got wealthy beyond our wildest dreams. It took a long time. And he made sure we all had good financial advisors because we were building up tons of equity in something that didn't have a lot of value for a lot of years, but ended up. And he's now a billionaire many times over. He had a really great financial advisor whom he insisted take all of his executives, whether we had enough assets or not. So we punched above our weight. I guess what I learned from that, though, is you want somebody who's very experienced, who has a philosophy, whose philosophy is careful. And this person this group that we use is, and this is where you get to the first question is your risk tolerance. If you're very, very risk averse, you don't want somebody who's going to put you in a lot of highly risky investments. And these people, the advice, the first thing, and I'll never forget it, the first thing that this advisor, who's still our advisor, said to us was, pigs get slaughtered. And what he meant was, if you get too aggressive and you do too much trying to make too much and you're not careful about risk, the odds are you're going to get slaughtered, and lots of people do. The other thing is, and you know, it's finance 101, but you need to make certain that they're talking about it, is you need a diversified portfolio. You can't, I mean, you can, but pigs get slaughtered. You can't be all in risky stocks, or there's a high risk you're going to, you may hit a zillion home runs, but you may also lose a lot. So you need a mix of equities and bonds, and then as you get more sophisticated, and you get more money and you get more diversified, they start working in other things. But they should always be talking to you about risk and making sure you don't lose everything. And again, you can do this yourself. I couldn't, because I don't have the discipline, and I didn't have the time. But you should, I would ask friends who are successful, not just one friend, because you want some choices. Who do you use for this? You also need really good attorneys at some point. And usually your financial advisor, if you have a good one, will know some good attorneys. Okay.
Why did CEE make your list?
First I met you. I'm interested in STEM, as you know. I'm going to tell you what you know, but the people don't know. I'm interested in STEM. I come from a world where we cared about the best students going into STEM discipline. That was a deeply held value at Regeneron. That is a deeply held value. So there's that. But when I got into CEE and I learned more, that was where I met so many first generation, the board members from CEE, who are on CEE, on the CEE board, who are RSI members. Many of them were first generation. Many of the students themselves are first generation. So it checked two of my boxes. And I also have worked with you long enough, you CEE and you Joanna, to know that the money is well spent. Nobody's wasting money at CEE. It goes where you want it to be spent.
Ross, Joanne asked a question that was actually on the mind of one of our parents, and So thank you for answering that. They wanted to know why you came to the conclusion that CEE was a fit for you.
Yeah, I mean, I've been involved. I was trying to figure out how long I've been on the board. It must be 8 years or something like that now, 7 or 8 years. And I've worked very, very closely. So I've been able to see how the machine works. I've been able to meet the students. I've met most of the people who are heavily involved, certainly in RSI. There's also a whole lot of good that gets done. That's also important to me, by the way. I didn't mention it. There's work in the rural schools in Virginia, and it just crosses a lot of the T's and dots a lot of the I's that are important to me. And you do have to worry with some organizations about how much they spend on overhead versus on the actual product. CEE is not wasting is not wasting money, I guarantee you.
We are lean. Sometimes I wonder if we're too lean. But
well, we probably are, and it would be helpful to have some more money.
yes, but also, I don't think it ever leaves the office, the thought that we are spending other people's money in support of our programs. And when I see some of the ways other organizations spend money, we don't travel first class. We don't do luxurious spending because all our programs are free to students and teachers. And the more we have, the more we can spend on doing these wonderful educational STEM things.
Right. The other thing, Chris and Joanne, that I neglected to mention, but it was something that I actually learned when I came to Regeneron, and I see it at CEE. One of the things that just bowled me over about Regeneron when I went there was how Regeneron was able to attract overqualified people to come and be part of that operation. And if you look at the boards of most small nonprofits, they are not people of the stature that Joanne has attracted to CEE. And good, highly qualified, busy people don't become involved in things that aren't worth their time. And I would encourage the family members, the attendees who haven't looked at who's on the CEE board, to look at the backgrounds of the people that Joanne is able to attract, because it's such a wonderful thing.
Thank you so much, Ross. As you explore your personal philanthropy, think about CEE. We surely would appreciate it.
And just one, I'm sorry, I didn't have anything to say, but I do based on that. It doesn't necessarily, at this, whatever stage you're at, it doesn't need to be a huge check. It would be nice, but it's not necessary. And, again, part of the evolution that we went through, at least, was just giving it all was hard for us emotionally. But you begin to see the impact when you're part of something like this. So even a small check given regularly, over time, you'll be in a position to write a larger check, maybe. And it may or may not make sense, for a legacy gift to CEE at some point, but you'll know when you'll know when you get there. But any kind of donation is used well. Now I'm done.
Thank you, Ross. Thank you to parents and friends of CEE, we appreciate that you took the time. It's been a very fine and helpful session by a wonderful trustee. Thank you, Ross. All of you and Ross have a wonderful rest of the weekend.